they're going to have kids, they're going to have grandkids. So if I were to say to you, just imagine you're married and you have kids. If I were to say to you, what's the value of the lives of your grandchildren in 100 years, what would you say? What's the value of the lives of your grandchildren in 100 years? Are they valuable? Yeah, they're valuable. Most people would say, of course that's valuable. I would care about the lives of my descendants in 100 years. I will be around, they'll be my grandchildren. I would care about that. And yet, if I offered you $5 million, you wouldn't take that. And the present value of $5 million is only $1,000. So, and so the parallel here is that the present value of the future lives of your grandchildren is nothing. That the future really has no seat at the table. We don't make decisions that will mean anything in 100 years. We can't think that way. We use discount rates for every decision that's made. I don't know how many of you might be business majors or know something about a discount rate, but that means when you get a bank account, you're paid a certain rate of interest. The higher the better, right? And then if you're on the business side of that, borrowing that money, you're going to evaluate your rate of return compared to that interest rate. So we use interest rates to discount the future. And that means that present value of $5 million is only $1,000. Present value of future generations is nothing. And the future generations have no seat at the table. So we don't, as an economy, run for the future. We run for the here and now. And that is huge. And the more we have this battle between Republicans and Democrats over the role of government, the more focus you see on pushing government out of long-term planning. And China, as an example, goes to the other extreme. There's a lot of long-term planning, and it's certainly not a place you may not want to live, but it's extraordinary in terms of the impact that they're having in terms of steering their economy. So just think about that we are a very short-term focused kind of country. So I'm getting to the end here. So how do we measure returns? I mean, most banks are going to say, hey, what's our return on equity, on invested equity? But we look at it and we say, sure, we have to be financially successful. We have to make profit. No margin, no mission. So all this stuff is great, but if we're not going to make profit, we're not going to be able to hang around. But beyond that, we want to look at how are we growing sustainable businesses? How are we impacting our communities? What kind of jobs and lives are we helping to create? So it's a whole different way to look at how you measure returns in a business. We're not alone. There are about 50 banks around the world that we're joined with in something called the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. We all are similar kinds of banks. We meet once a year. We talk occasionally during the year, comparing strategy and impacts we're having and exchange of staff, etc. It's been quite a group for me to be part of. So people are speaking up. I mean, a lot of people are complaining, right? I mean, Wells Fargo's gone through a kind of an appalling change right now, and people are protesting. Certainly the Keystone Pipeline, the Dakota Indians, and how they were treated has led to a lot of people changing their accounts. You have Chase and others lending on that. There's now a list of banks that are involved with those kinds of activities that you're encouraged to stay away from. And so really the question to you is, so what does this mean to you personally? We can talk about social business and all that. Yeah, does your bank have convictions? Right, there's two kinds of convictions. So these banks have $321 billion in fines since this whole thing began. So what kind of values or convictions does your bank have? And so I would encourage you to ask the question, where does your money spend the night? And your money it's not in your mattress, right? So it's not in a vault in the bank either. So it's not sleeping at night, it's spending the night, it's going somewhere, it's doing something. And so the question is, what's it doing? If you could, if you take a dollar bill and imagine it was a magic carpet and you could get on it and fly around the world, would you be excited to see what your money's doing? How it's invested, how it's maybe doing strip mining in West Virginia or clear cutting in Southeast Asia or sweatshops in China or someplace? Would you be happy to know that your money's doing that? You buy organic food, right? A lot of people are interested in organic food, but what about an organic bank? Have you made that connection? You say, oh, it's just a little account. Yeah, but all of you together are more than a little account. And so, but there's an increasing movement of people saying, yeah, that's important where my money spends the night. I should go to a credit union, I should go to a local bank, rather than one of the big money center banks. So those are kind of my comments. That's my story. That's to talk about New Resource Bank, and I think we have lots of time for questions. Questions? you sign them? Yes.
Besides this kind of catchphrase that you have here, what other ways are you looking at to try and convince people that going, I mean, this is not the right term, but like the green route of investing is better for them than other alternatives? Because I think a lot of people, they say, okay, well, out of sight, out of mind, I'm going to invest my money, I just want these high returns. But is there a way to kind of guilt trip them there so that they will actually go into a more considered route for their money?
Yeah, so you asked a question about really how do you persuade people to invest their money in a better way than what a lot of people do. A lot of people just go to their mutual fund, or if they have an investment advisor, and they just say, I want maximum returns and out of sight, out of mind. And I think it's a slow consciousness building kind of thing. I mean, the analogy of you buy organic food, you ultimately have to be responsible for where you're banking and where you're investing. And I think that there are a lot of people waking up and understanding that their role as an economic agent, that, as you said in my introduction, money can be an agent of change. That money is a store of your values. It's not just a store of value. It's not just a medium of exchange. It's a store of your values, and you can be an agent of change. So, I can't shake people up, but I think that ultimately through crises, I mean, look at climate change. As climate change becomes more and more real, and people get more and more focused on what are we going to do about it, I think they will look at their own portfolios and say, why am I investing in companies that are marching against climate change? So it's a long, slow awakening process, but I think we've seen a lot of that in the U.S. right now. The fastest growing sector in the whole investment world is socially responsible investing. Many people are interested. So it is growing quite rapidly. That's a good question. Other questions? How about you and your careers? Do you think about, do you know where you're going to be in 5 years? Have you figured out what your purpose is and how you're going to get there? I mean, I certainly wandered around a lot before I ended up in the banking world. What are some of your majors? Do you have majors that you've already decided, or are most of you still thinking about that? I see smiles. Yeah, I mean, for me it was a difficult thing. And there's a great quote by Frederick Buechner. He says, you're called to the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. And I always thought that was really interesting, because your deep gladness, that means, where you're really in the zone. That means things that you are passionate about, things that you're good at. But you're given those gifts in a way to serve. And so where do you want to serve? Where's the world's hunger that you can serve? It's a good quote. Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned early on that you kind of ended up working for Bank of America by accident, more or less. Were you ever able to go back to your biology background? And is this kind of related to kind of revisiting that initial gladness that you had?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Yes, I did human biology. I did environmental planning at Berkeley. I worked for the California Coastal Commission. I worked for the equivalent of the California Coastal Commission in Washington, D.C. And then we moved to Asia. So there was sort of this big change for us. And that began this banking career, which I found kind of fascinating. When I had gotten fired actually from my last job, and I was really disillusioned with working for banks, for smaller banks, because I realized that in spite of everything they say, their real motivation is to sell the bank and make a lot of money selling the bank, even though they say they're a community citizen. And I got this call from New Resource Bank, who needed a new CEO. And so they were kind of surprised. They said, oh my gosh, he studied environmental planning and human biology, but that was 30 years ago. Where is he now? So sort of the same question that you're asking. And so in a way, this is a renaissance for me of reconnecting with all of that. And in that sense, human biology is a perfect major for everything that I'm talking about, but it took me a long time to get there. I would say I was wandering in the wilderness for many years until I got to this job. This has been the perfect job. It allows me to integrate my values from a lot of different perspectives and to speak like this to people. So yeah, it took a while.
What did your father and sort of your parents think about your current career trajectory? Were they happy with it? Did they have some motivation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So just being honest about that. So my father was a highly accomplished person. He expected me to be a highly accomplished person, and that meant that I would ultimately be in a large company, be in Washington like he was, but really play on a more national scene. And I didn't do that. When I when I came back from Bank of America, at least there was hope that I was at a big bank and I was going to be a big shot, but I left Bank of America and I started working for local community banks in San Diego. And we had a family, and I just made a series of different decisions. And so I would say that, frankly, my relationship with my father kind of cooled. You know, that he was, I think, somewhat disappointed that I was supposed to be the golden child that was going to go exceed his career. And that was true for many years. And then there was a time when my mother was ill. She was in the hospital, and I went and spent the weekend with the two of them in the hospital. And it's funny, when you slow down, you spend like 2.5 days in a room with somebody. And after I left, my father said to my sister, "Wow, you know, Vince is really an amazing person." And you know, wow, that's nice, thank you. So that kind of began the Renaissance, and he was going back. He had fought in World War II, and in Italy, and so he was going to go back to Italy with the captain of his. He was the first lieutenant, the captain of his company, and that captain and his son, and my sister was going to go with him, and she said, "No, you should take Vince." And so I went with him, and we spent 2 weeks retracing his steps in the Italian campaign, and that really kind of completed the Renaissance. And he admitted to me later, you know, he said, "I made very different decisions from you, and I